Welcome to this tutorial about creating game systems. Today we will be creating a crafting system, just a simple one to give you sort of an idea of how you can approach the difficulty of creating one. So let's just get started, jump in to see what we will be creating and then start actually doing it. So this is the crafting system that we will be creating. And essentially it consists of, we have all of these items laying around, that these boxes here with the red spheres around them are items that we can pick up. So running on them we get some debug messaging in the top left saying what we have picked up, and this is just to allow us to get to the crafting part. So this project starts off with a very simplistic, basic and quite bad inventory system just so we can focus on the crafting. But yeah, now you can run up to the crafting table, and the crafting table has an area where if you get close enough you are able to craft. Pressing E here now will make the crafting component that is on this player check if it is in a crafting area, essentially, making sure that it actually is able to open up the craft UI. Opening up the craft UI here, you can see that we have two recipes that we know of, and these are based on the component as well. It has a known recipes array of what's available, and that is what populates this for us. Clicking on one of these, you can see that we get a detail being presented here, which is all the components that are needed to craft this item. And then if you are fulfilling the needs for that, so this one requires 2 nails and we have 4 nails, then we are able to craft the item, and this button is enabled. Clicking on this button you'll get some debugging messaging about what we have crafted, and you can see that the details or the components have been reduced by the amount that we have used for the craft. And if we click back to the wall, we can see that the craft button gets disabled because we no longer have enough components to craft those things, because it requires 4 nails and we have 2 nails remaining. And then you can close out the table if you want to and run away. And that's essentially the gist of what we will be creating with this crafting system, and what we will hopefully be learning along the way. So here we are inside of Unreal Engine 4. Now this will be the starting project that will be linked down below in the description that you will be getting. And the reason we have the starting project is just so we have a basic inventory system in place, so we can focus on the actual crafting system. Before we do that though, I want to go through the inventory system a little bit, just so you get an idea of sort of how it works. The intention here was that we create a inventory system as a blueprint component, so it could be any inventory system essentially, and then have that inventory system communicate with your character, which in turn will communicate with your crafting system and vice versa. So if you create them like modular devices or systems like that, then your character will be the intermediary where the communication will happen, where it will get sort of a message from one of these systems, like the inventory or the crafting system, and then it will decide of how it's supposed to interpret it and send it to the proper function or interface or whatever you have available to you if you have a different interface, a different inventory system than this one. So basically what we have created here is what's in this inventory folder. So we have this blueprint component which is called BPC inventory, and it is currently attached to our character. So our third person character over here has the BPC inventory on it. Now it has very basic functionality. This is a super basic inventory system. It doesn't have much in the way of graphical interface at all. There's no UI essentially. We do have a HUD here, but that's to be used for the crafting system. So the inventory system essentially is just the ability to, well, currently we will be expanding it a tiny little bit, but we currently have the ability to add items to our inventory and to print out what kind of items we have available in the inventory currently based on what we have picked up. So this is what you see over here. All of these cubes over here, they represent different items in the world that we can pick up that will be added to our inventory. So just to demonstrate that shortly, You can see we can run over this and we get some debug messaging saying what kind of items we're finding and what kind of items have been added to the inventory. And then if we press the 1 key, we will type out whatever inventory we currently have, which is 4 nails, 3 wooden boards, and 2 hammers. So how this is done is with these different objects. So to start off with, we have a structure called sItem. Now, sItem is our most basic item in this project. It's simply going to have a name and a class to it. And the name is of the type enum item names, which we can open up here, which is essentially a list of all the items that we have in the game. And the reason we have created this enum is because we want to make it easier for us when we later on add the crafting system, so we don't have the issue of possibly typing in something wrong when we want to have certain crafting components. We only have the availability of choosing the ones that are available in the enum. So that's why the enum here is the name for this item. And the class is what we will be using later on to spawn these items when we have crafted them as well. In addition to the sItem, we also have something called an sInventory item. An inventory item is the same as an item, with the only difference that it can have an amount also. Now, this system isn't super complex. It will. This is mainly used for the crafting system to say that you need 4 wooden boards to craft 1 wall, for example, or something like that. So the 4 will come in here, and the item here will be the actual item that we need. So there are some limitations in the system, and we'll see that later, but that's not the point of the system. It's to teach and to allow you to see how it can be done. And if you wanted to have the system work differently for you, then you know what you could tweak and how. So these 2 structures are what makes up our items in the game, or the project. And in addition to that, we also have our data table here, which is called items. Now, opening this up, you can see that we have a one-to-one relation between our enums. The key name in the data table here must match the enums here for it to make it easier for us later on. So if you were to expand this system and add new items, you would have to add first one enumerator, and then add 1 row over here, which would be matching the row name, and then have the other information available here as well. But this is essentially where we define all the different items that can be in the world. In addition to that, we also have classes for them to actually have a physical representation in the world. So these are the pickup items. The item pickup base is the base class which all of the other inherit from, which consists of a mesh to represent it being in the world. So this would be changed to a hammer or plank or whatever you wanted to have in the actual child class. And then you have a pickup range, which essentially just allows anyone that enters this area to pick it up. And this is done very simply. It has logic. Let's go see here. So if we overlap our area, then we will go and check if that specific actor that's overlapping us has the BPI inventory pickup interface. So these are the interfaces that we will be applying to characters in the world that are able to pick up objects in the world. So in this case, we have our character over here has the BPI inventory pickup. So it can pick up items, but if you wanted to have NPCs to pick them up as well, then you would just give them this interface and they would be able to pick it up as well. Yes, so other than that, it just checks if it has that ability to pick up items. We send to that specific actor that you have picked up an item and which item that is. And then we also have our debug information over here, and then we destroy the actor. And that's essentially all that the base class has in it. Then we create a child class for each of the different items we want to have in the world. So our hammer, our wooden boards and stuff like that. So they are completely empty here. The only thing that they have populated to them is that they have filled in this item structure. the one over, oh, we can see it like this. Let's do it like so. Variables. So this one, item. The name here needs to be populated to represent. So this wooden board blueprint class would have the wooden board item as its item. And this is just so it can match against the database table. So those are the three things you actually need to do to add a new item. You need to add it to the enum, you need to add it to the data table, and you need to make a class for it that matches it and has the proper type set. And then you have essentially added one object to the world that you can interact with. This is the base, and from this we will build upon this. We will be using our HUD to create our crafting system, and we will be placing it in there, and we will be using this blue crafting folder to create it. We will be placing all or most of our development objects in here. Now, in addition to the starting project, which opens up this project, I will also have a link to the finished project. So if you run into any kind of issue, or you would rather just study the final product and see what that's like, or anything like that, then you have that project available to you, which will be what we end up with at the end of this tutorial series. So it's up to you how you want to go along. If you want to learn, I would recommend that you take the starting project, follow along, and actually do all the steps as we go along to properly like give yourself muscle memory of having done the different things. And if you want to take it a step further in addition to that, I would recommend that you, once you have completed the project, you create a new project, or you take the starting project again, and from that you build a new crafting system, possibly a little bit different from what we have built, just so you get to train on creating a crafting system. So with all of that out of the way, let's get started with actually creating this crafting system from the beginning. So let's get started with the first thing. One common way of doing crafting is that you generally need to be in a specific area or at a specific item to be able to craft. It could be something like a crafting table or an object of that nature, or it could be like a safe space like a base or a base of operations, something like that, that allows you to do the crafting. So we will be doing something similar just to show how that could be done as well. So we will be creating a crafting table. So let's start off doing that. We'll just do a blueprint class. We will make it of the type actor. We'll call it bp underscore crafting table. We'll open that up. We will keep it very simple. We will have a static mesh, just so we have a representation in the world to begin with. And we'll choose a cube. In addition to that, we also want to have an area which signifies that you are within the crafting components area. So let's start off with scaling this a little bit, moving it up a little bit so it's flush with the floor. I think that's fine. So we'll add a collision box. Now this collision box is what will be representing the area that you need to be within to craft. So we'll scale it up a bit, move it up a little bit, scale it maybe a little bit further, be a little bit generous with the area that we want to have the player to be able to craft within. In addition to this, we can just make it simple for us and show that this is the crafting table. So we'll type in text, we'll do a text render, and we can choose to move that text a little bit up. Now it's going to be a little bit distorted because of our scaling. So we can actually change that by moving it to the root node and resetting the scaling like so. In addition to that, we also want to center the text, and we do that by the horizontal alignment, put it to center. And as the text, we can just type in crafting table. Like so. Let's duplicate this and have another one and move that one a little bit up. And this one we can say press E to craft, something of that nature. This will be just a simple way to show the player that we are within the crafting area. So that's essentially what this will be functioning as. We'll save that and compile that. So let's rename this text. We can call this one our interaction text. And let's just add the simple functionality that we need to be able to see this text to begin with. So we can go to our box over here, the collision box, the volume that we have created. And we can create a component begin overlap. And we can, while we're here, also make sure that we get the end overlap one. So we have them both. We'll drag in our interaction text and we'll make a copy of it like so. From here we can just say set visibility. So when we enter the box, we say that the new visibility is visible, and when we leave the box we set it to false. For this to work, we also need to start off with setting it by default to visible false, so that it doesn't show in the world. And then we need to place it in the world. So we can place it over here, we can rotate it 180 degrees. And now we have our crafting table over here, and if we move close enough we can see that it says press E to craft. We will do one more thing with this that we will be needing later, but just ahead of time. So we will be creating a interface. We go to Blueprints and Blueprint Interface. We call this BPI Craft Enabled. Now this blueprint will essentially be whatever determines that you are able to craft. Going into our crafting table, clicking Class Settings, and adding this interface, Craft Enabled. We have now said that this object here is something that determines Craft Enabled. So what we will be doing later is we will be checking when a player character wants to start crafting, it will check, are you overlapping any area that says that you are able to craft? So if they're inside of this collision box of this crafting table, for example, then it will say, fine, you can craft. Or if you were to have a base of operation, you could have a some sort of blueprint that created an area that encompassed the whole base, which meant that if the player tried to craft, then it would say craft is enabled due to this interface. So that's essentially the functionality that this will have, but we will not be creating it right now. We will be coming back to this a little bit later. The next step for us will be that we want to have recipes. We want to have the ability to say, to craft item X, you need to have components Y and Z, for example. So to do this, we will be creating a new structure. So we can go into Blueprints and we say we want a structure. We call this S_recipe. This will define how our recipe structure looks. So we can open this up for now. So we went through a little bit about how we have this item and inventory item structure from earlier. So we will be making use of those structures and reusing them for our recipe. So the first part we want to call here is the actual crafted item. This will be the item that we craft from creating a recipe. And this will be of the type S_item. So it's the structure that we had before in the beginning that I told you about, that had the enumerator, that's a fixed string name, and a class name to define what kind of class it will be when it's crafted. So that's why we're making use of that. In addition to that, we want a new variable, and this variable is what we will be calling crafting components. So this will be all the things that we need to have available to us to be able to craft this item on the first row. So these are the components and this is the result of the craft. Now this one needs to be, to begin with, an array, because we want to be able to have multiples of them, but we're also going to be changing type because S_item didn't actually have a quantity connected to it, but the s_inventory did. So if we search for the s_inventory item, we get that one there. And now we have essentially created our recipe structure, and we're done with that part. Can save everything like this, and then we'll move on to the next part. So how can we make use of our recipe then? Well, we can make use of it by using another data table. So let's start off with creating one of those. We'll go to blueprints. We'll go to miscellaneous, and we'll go to data table. And it wants to have a structure to base this data table on, and we want to make use of the recipe table. So we'll go down here and click on one of the S-recipe ones. Click OK. Call this DT for data table, underscore recipes. I'm not entirely sure if it's with an EI, but recipes, that looks wrong. Let's do recipes like so. So this will be our data table where we define all the different things that you're able to craft in the game. So we'll double click and open this one up, and this needs to have the prerequisites done for actually being an item. So the item needs to be in the world. It needs to exist as a s_item structure. It needs to be in the data table for items, and it needs to have a class for this to work. But barring those things, we can now add things here. Since I've already created a bunch of different ones to begin with here, we will be making use and creating crafts for these. So if we go into the recipe data table again, we'll click add. We'll click on the first row and press F2 to rename the row name. And we will call this wall. And the reason we call it wall is because wall is an existing, if we go to over here, wall is an existing name that we have, and it also exists in our item database. So how to craft a wall? Well, we need to have a crafted item. Important thing here is that the name here needs to be wall. And now you see what we gained by having made an enumerator earlier. We're only able to choose items that exist from that enumerator, so we can't actually type something in here and get it wrong that way. We can of course make an error by typing it wrong in the actual structure, or sorry, the enumerator, the item name over here. But barring that, that's the only place where we can make an error. So we'll click on wall here, and that part's important. The class here is also important, so we choose the BP wall here. This will be the class that will be spawned if we were to craft it in the world. In addition to that, it also has the crafting components that we define, so the things that you need to be able to craft this item. Now, to craft this item, we can make a bunch of our components or items we already created as components to require this build. So we'll add first one item, and here it's not important to fill in the class, because the only thing it will be checking against is the name. So if we say we want to have wooden boards and we want to have 2 of them to craft this, then that's fine. Let's say we wanted to add another item. We can add that item, and we can choose this one to be nails, for example. And we can say that for nails we need to have 4 of them. And we can add a third item, and we can say that we also need to have a hammer as our last item, and we want to have 1 hammer to make use of this. Now, in this context, it's fine, but it doesn't maybe make sense in a crafting system, because all of these will be things that will both be required for the player to have in its inventory, but they will also be consumed, and a hammer maybe you wouldn't want to consume. So this specific crafting system is not built around like having things like a required item like a hammer that doesn't get consumed, just so you're aware of that. But you could always extend this functionality later on if you wanted to have it as a requirement, but yet not being consumed when crafted. So now we have essentially created our first item. So to create a wall in the game, this is what you need to do. Let's add another one, and we will call this wooden board. again, an item that already exists in the structures and data tables. We'll choose the wooden board blueprint. And for this one, let's say we just want to have one item to craft this, and it will be the nail. Let's say 2 nails becomes 1 wooden board. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense, of course, but doesn't really matter for this purpose, I believe. Anyway, so now we've created our starting data table. So now we have our first few recipes that we can make use of to craft, essentially. We don't have the functionality, of course, we can't actually craft it, but we will get there. So we'll close down the DT recipes and the structure for recipes. We're done with those for now. The crafting table is also fine, like so. And we can move on to our next part in this. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.